I'll try not to keep you too long, but I just want to tell you a little bit about me and my kind of inspirations, but also, I guess, the kind of where I fit into this kind of theme of science and technology with creativity. I'm a designer and illustrator. I graduated, like Jess, from the University of Brighton. I studied illustration, and I guess when I was at university, I went through quite a change in the way I thought about art and design. And I kind of, I guess, like even though I was studying illustration, like Jess, realised that actually what you would consider traditional illustration wasn't actually my kind of calling. And I think my passion really came from just an overwhelming desire to make things, make sort of models and gather objects and craft things from sort of everyday materials around me. So how science and technology has influenced me goes right back to kind of, well, when I was really young and sort of started playing with Lego models and things like that, and constructing my own things in that sense. But that's on a sort of very basic level. But when I was at university, one of my final projects I was doing was kind of all about technology and this sort of juxtaposition of craft and technology. And sorry, I don't know what's going on there. I didn't touch anything. Yeah, and but I'm going to talk to you more about that in a bit. What I want to talk to you about first is kind of this idea of analogy, something that I think runs through the majority of my work, and where I kind of started introducing kind of themes with technology was all to do with analogy, really. And of sort of observation as well. I'm really excited by sort of seeing something in a context you wouldn't expect, or kind of imagining something in a way that it isn't. So, like something simple like this cauliflower, for example. You know, I'm sure some of you looked at it and for a split second you may have thought, oh, it's a brain. And it's that kind of like analogy, that sort of interest and playfulness with objects and materials that I started getting really interested in at university. I did this project, for example, where I was, noticing faces in inanimate things. I actually turned it into like this screen printed poster where I just took the headlights and the grills of different cars, and they sort of ended up looking like these manga characters. And again, I've sort of started getting really interested in different people, different artists and different sort of scientists and various people who were kind of like exploring this idea of analogy and like comparing one thing in terms of another. This is a scientist and an artist who was friends with Albert Einstein, and he's called Fritz Kahn, and he created loads of really bizarre kind of diagrams, almost diagrammatical like illustrations of the human body, but comparing parts of the human body to machines and like based on their kind of function or whatever. And I was kind of one of those kids, and still am very interested in like all those books where it's cross-section through things and showing how things work, and I quite like to feed an element of like that reality of sort of how things work into my work as an illustrator and a set designer. Man Ray and surrealism in general is something I'm very interested in, because they often sort of compared one thing in terms of another and created these surreal images. You're comparing the woman's body, female form, to a violin. And this kind of like juxtaposition is something that I've read a lot about as well. It's like this is a really interesting book for those of you who want to feel good about sort of being in a creative career. There's a quote that I pulled from this book: "Sometimes the most powerful ideas come from simply combining two existing ideas no one else ever thought to unite." we all like strive to be creative and come up with something original, but sometimes like you can't just pluck an idea from thin air, and sometimes it's just about placing one thing into the context of something else, and then you get an original idea from that. And once I realised that, and once you sort of read books like this, for example, that's like very inspiring, you kind of, things sort of become a bit easier to comprehend. You're not just sort of, I don't know, literally plucking ideas out of nowhere. An example that they gave in this book is a guy who went. This is a true story of a man who's an avid cross-country skier who used to get really bad back from taking all of his stuff with him on his ski trips. And he was on a trip to New York once and was walking across the Brooklyn Bridge, and he was noticing the physics of the bridge, the way that the suspension actually worked and took the forces down from the whole bridge down into these feet. And he looked at that and he thought, hang on, you can put that into the physics of that into a backpack. And so he actually was the guy that invented the second sort of band that you get around your backpack, so that it distributes the weight on your back more evenly. And that idea came from looking at the physics of the Brooklyn Bridge. So coming back to me, I was obviously sort of interested in this idea of analogy and juxtaposition, and but likewise I got very interested at university in technology and how I can explore those themes, current issues in technology and culture, but sort of trying to represent them. Being an illustration student, it was all about communication, learning how to communicate an idea in a very visual and direct way, and they were sort of, it seems like a perfect marriage. This was the first project I did at university where it felt like a real perfect marriage between things I was learning at university about communication, about design, but also kind of themes that I was interested in, and also skills that I really wanted to move forward with. And this project, I called it The Future of Books, and I made it just at the time when the first Kindle was coming out, and there was a lot of talk at the time about what was going to happen to print media, what was going to happen to print media, magazines, everything like that, and sort of libraries. Oh God, all the libraries are going to close down, and it was like a really hot debate, and obviously it still is to some degree. And so my way of illustrating this, my way of illustrating this was to create this book, was to create this laptop from a book, and Brighton University had a great bookbinding facility, and I went there and basically took an old second-hand book from an Oxfam and cut it up and rebound it, stamped the sort of new title with foil block, and created that project. And it was really, an exciting time for me, because I realised that this is how I want to illustrate, so that's how I continued. So this was my final project at university, and continuing the theme of technology. I at the time had a part-time job working. I'm just going to say it, I worked at Argos for several years, and I actually weirdly got some of my best ideas whilst I was just sitting behind the till, sort of not really doing anything, and telling people what collection point to go to. And I was always amazed actually at how quickly sort of the turnaround was for technology products that they were selling, and how people update their phones so often, and a new catalogue comes out and there's this whole range of new products that didn't exist before, and it's kind of I was getting really fascinated by kind of consumerism and technology and the pace, just the sheer pace at which it kind of evolved. And I had this idea, I started being really interested in using paper and as a material, because it's a really nice way of showing the disposability of something, and obviously for this project in particular it felt like the perfect medium for me to use. because what I wanted to show essentially was just the sort of transience of technology and how quickly it's evolved. So I made a Russian doll. And just to take that point a bit further about what I was saying about using paper and as a material to represent disposability, I sort of started more after university, really, becoming more obsessed with this idea of the medium as the message, and kind of wanting to explore using materials as a way of communicating something. So, you know, what do different materials represent? How can you use a particular material to represent a particular message, to communicate something in particular? And so I sort of began, even though at university I didn't have many facilities, I wasn't able to get to the woodwork shop, I wasn't able to do this thing, I was still interested in all these different materials around me. And kind of using everyday things as well, looking at something in a different way, and thinking about how that material could be put into this context to make an image. And so I've got this little box at home which has just got these tiny little swatches. It's like one of the most exciting things in the world. It's just a box of tiny material swatches, but it's a real inspiration boost for me, because if I'm trying to think, you know, if I'm sort of trying to imagine the perfect material to use to get across the right kind of message, then sometimes it can be quite inspiring. There's the Institute of Making takes that kind of whole thing massively a step further. This is quite a new thing, Institute of Making at the UCL. They've got a materials library, and basically they want to gather all the materials known in the entire world, and basically just study them and study what they can do and what they're used for and why they're used for those things, and they catalogue them and organise them. And it's like, I haven't actually been yet, and I can't believe I haven't been, but I've read so much about it and know people that work there, and it's exciting, like, hearing about everything that's going on there. They actually have open days, which I believe they're going to be starting again in the new year, so like, if you're interested in kind of materials and yeah, then go. So this is some more examples of samples they have. And they have crazy things that, you know, some of you probably know, have heard of Ferrofluid, but it's basically a magnetic liquid that can create these crazy kind of formations just from like using magnets around it. Anyway, so kind of this interest in materials is something that I carry through to doing some more personal work, and then eventually kind of more commissions. This is something I did where it was essentially an idea I had for a very long time in my head, and sort of didn't really know where it was going, but I really like, I guess I really enjoy cycles and sort of paradoxes, and I wanted to show that juxtaposition as well. So, you know, kind of the ultimate cycle, or the ultimate kind of paradox to me, is the chicken and the egg. And because it's just like mind-boggling and confusing, and there isn't really an answer to it. So I wanted to just kind of show that in a really simple and fun way, and this was my way of showing that kind of paradox. Literally went to my local bakery, asked for a bucket of eggshells, came back the next day and they had it all for me, and I took it home and used a Dremel multi-tool to sand down the eggshells. This is a more recent commission for Men's Health magazine. I still don't really know why they asked me to do this, but they wanted a toothpaste out of brain. A brain made out of toothpaste. Toothpaste made out of brain, that would be good, wouldn't it? That's the next project. Yeah. I just love the absurdness of it. I love that my job sometimes is to just create these ridiculous things out of materials, different materials, and it's really good for me because when I was at university, as I've said earlier, you know, I didn't have access to all these facilities, so I'm learning how to use materials in such a like lo-fi way. Like I don't have big sort of equipment. Obviously I could, if I wanted to, I could, particular projects. But I think my approach has always been try and approach it from a very crafted, simple way. And it's all everything I like to do for real in camera. And working with photographers who can just sort of bring out the qualities in whatever the thing is that I've made. And so this one, by the way, if you ever want to attempt to do this yourself, use Aquafresh. It's the best one. Don't try using McLean's, it's too foamy. I work a lot for different science journals and kind of magazines that explore kind of science and technology. Scientific American is one of the ones that I work for the most. And they often have quite interesting articles, some of which are quite, well, I might consider a bit bland in the sense that they might be talking about like finance or kind of the economy and things like that. But it's interesting because sometimes it's the challenge is about, the challenge with briefs like that is to try and create something really interesting out of something a bit more mundane. This one happened to not be such a mundane one, but it was quite a scary one. It was all about bird flu and the kind of threat of bird flu. And how kind of basically there are scientists that are sort of tinkering with it, and there's this whole worry about will it escape from the lab, and how that would be terrifying if that something if that spread basically. So the challenge for me in this instance was to just sort of represent that threat of bird flu, and with my kind of approach, which is essentially quite childlike. I'm happy to admit that I enjoy the simple, kind of finding the perfect material and creating the image that sort of like represents that threat as sort of neatly as possible. And so, a mushroom cloud made of feathers seemed to sort of fit the bill. And I think I'm very interested in science, but it's always from like I guess it's always from like it's almost a childhood perspective. So I love a lot of the images I create for science magazines and stuff. I read the articles, and so much of the time I don't understand what they're saying. The way they're written, they can be very complicated and kind of very theoretical and using language that I don't understand. And so I really have to try and kind of simplify things, simplify the way these articles are written, and try and sum it up in a very kind of neat, like childlike vision of what this could be. And I really enjoy that challenge as well. I really enjoy that kind of simplification and trying to represent something in a fun way. To make, this one, for example, is all about the interconnectivity of the five senses and how they're more interconnected than we sort of think. And so it's really fun to just sort of imagine a way, imagine an image in your mind, and then sort of look at materials that you could use and colours and things to represent that. This one was one of those ones that was quite tricky to sort of imagine. This was an article, quite a theoretical article. What if, how would gravity react if the universe was flat? And so, initially I attempted to sort of understand all these theories and formulas and things like that, and in the end I just looked back into myself and thought, well, hang on, what do I know about the universe and what do I know about gravity? And kind of looking at representing kind of gravity in terms of the Newton apple and things like that. These were things I understood, and I've understood because of my experience with science as growing up and GCSE, things like that. And I think Scientific American sort of weirdly quite appreciate that I'm sort of bringing things back down to a level that more people, the masses can understand, I guess. This is an article for Men's Health, and it was very, to put it very simply, it was all about heart disease, and so we just created this kind of heart and then set it on fire basically, and let the smoke kind of come through. Wired magazine quite often have quite interesting articles. This is all about the maker movement recently, and I think I really like, kind of, as I was saying earlier, the juxtaposition of sort of craft and technology, and sort of also modern technology and old technology, and sort of fusing the two. So this is one of those projects where I got to really show that, and this was sort of like using a mix of pipes and objects you can buy, from a hardware store, and then some things that I've made by hand, and it's really fun to sort of to mix things up a bit sometimes. And the same with this one, another one for Scientific American. Sort of the iPad made out of paper, but then kind of showing the interaction inside it with real physical objects and sort of painted wooden balls and things like that. This is all about digital education. The idea that more and more schools are going to be basically doing tests on iPads, and kids are going to be, there's going to be a lot more statistical information with regard to childhood development. And this one, another one for Wired, this is part of a series, but I'm just going to show you this one because it was one of my favourites. It was just showing, it was about molecular-sized machines, and so to me, I kind of really conjured up this image of this kind of very small atom, a molecule with with like holes inside it. This was a project I did with Gemma and a photographer called Mitch Payne, and it was really fun, like a lovely opportunity. And Gemma just had this idea that she wanted to kind of like produce a shoot that was about renewable energy, and so she got me and Mitch together, and we discussed it in a meeting, and just sort of like batted around a few ideas that would sort of combine all of our interests. And for me, it was very important to me that we create physical, real setups using real materials, and kind of try and create the sense of these different types of renewable energy on a small scale in the studio environment. And so this one, for example, is obviously Tidal Power, and the wave, we created it just by putting water and then food colouring inside the tank, just to bring out a bit more colour. And then literally I was there with a sort of piece of plastic just going like that, and then whilst Mitch was firing off loads and loads of photos until, like, it was very fast frame rate, so we could sort of go through them and see how the wave had moved, and then choose the best one, and the best one became the image that we used. This is Geothermal, so I kind of wanted to use also materials that in a way kind of relate, you can understand and relate to, in terms of, it's sort of representing Earth, but in a kind of smaller scale. So using kind of fish tank gravel seemed quite nice for this, to show the different heat. Wind power, solar power. This is created by just kind of putting some fake smoke inside the tank, and then shining a beam on it, and then onto the mirror that's the circle, and then that kind of all glowed up nicely. And then nuclear. And it's I sort of like drawing on scientific theories in some of my work, but I guess one of the better examples of that is for a display I did for Selfridges. Actually, it was 5 windows, and it was all inspired by the law of conversion of mass, and the idea that basically it's all to do with transformation. This was the biggest window, and it was 2 identical motorbikes, one of which was taken apart into all of its parts, component parts. And it was basically just showing that these 2 things are essentially the same, but you're just viewing them in 2 different ways. So we did that as a live installation, and I hung it all up onto these little metal rods, cables, people walking past. It was quite surreal, actually, very surreal, like with all these thousands of people walking past, seeing. Another one of the windows was a fairy tale castle, which was suspended alongside fairy tale books that it was made from, so kind of using the pages of the books to construct it. And this was another one, which was exactly 1,000 cans, empty cans, drinks cans, and then on the other side exactly the same number but just crushed down into a tiny cube. And then this was a wedding cake, and then all of its ingredients. And it's all a celebration of process as well, and kind of, I think that's another thing that I love to kind of, I love people to try and get from the things that I do, is the kind of sense that it's something that's been made and something that's been deconstructed and reconstructed, and telling that the kind of story in that sense through the way that the actual final result gets made. That's it really. Thank you very much.